It's CasNCourt TV. It's Courts in Session. Who wants the first lesson? It's this Cas, Miss Public Info. This has been crazy, y'all. I have been really trying to get my live together. So I've been popping in and out. And I am sorry for those of you who have seen me once and then haven't seen me and then don't know what happened. I think it's my webcams in my internet's instability. So I'm so sorry for those of you who have popped in and out. My apologies. I promise to get this handled in the future, but I want to assure you and let you know that I am here, and I am here to give you the rundown and try to do this in a very succinct and concise way so that folks who are not lawyers, folks who are lay people, folks who are like the people who are in the jury box right now can understand what is happening today in the courtroom. So let me start this off for probably the fifth time. I'm dedicated to getting this to you guys today. Okay, so what's going on? What's going on is that the prosecution, they're going first. This is their closing today. This is their time, as I said in previous episodes, to really show their stuff. This is their anchor. This is as a track and field reference. This is their anchor runner. The closing is how you close, is how you win this thing. You can go through the entire trial and you can sort of fudge on some areas, and you can have weak witnesses, but if you can nail down a good closing, I've seen it. I've been in trials where the prosecution and the defense have had ironclad closings and they have won cases with closings. I'm gonna give you a great example. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Johnny Cochran taught us about closings, taught us about trials, taught us about how closings win trials. About 30 years ago, he taught us that. And that is what I'm talking about. That's how you win a trial. This prosecution is doing its best. They have really performed today. I'm going to read you some of the transcript, but before I do that, I want to talk about what's important. What's important is to talk to this jury about the RICO. That is the big bubba on the charging dock. They have got to get through to the jury what the RICO means. I've repeated this over and over again because otherwise they're going to lose the RICO case. And it's not because they don't have the ingredients. They have the RICO. They've got it. They have him dead to right on the RICO. The issue is going to be whether or not that jury understands what the RICO is. The jury instructions, which is also called charging the jury charge. That jury instruction is 100 pages. And they worked all day yesterday from about 3:45 in the afternoon to about 7 or 8 o'clock at night. They worked, the prosecution and the defense and the judge worked on those jury instructions, and they worked to simplify them, which is the reason partly that the prosecution got rid of those three predicate acts: the attempted kidnapping, the attempted arson, and the aiding and abetting. Now, let me explain for those of you who are still confused about it in the class. That does not mean that the charges were dropped. There are no charges dropped. The predicate acts were dropped. That means that the attempted arson, the attempted kidnapping, the aiding and abetting, that is the part that is not part of the jury instructions and that the jury no longer has to consider. But the very act of arson, the very act of kidnapping, that means the Kid Cudi and the Capricorn Clark testimonies, those are the parts that are still under consideration, and those are the predicate acts that are a part of the RICO. That's what happened yesterday as it relates to those predicate acts that got dropped. Now, back to the prosecution. They spent the first half of the closing arguments really sort of bringing home the idea that this is a criminal enterprise, that Sean Combs is the head of a criminal enterprise, that the people that are underneath him happily did his bidding at his behest. And they talked about the law. The law is specific. It is very technical. And what that means is that the law says this: you don't have to actually enjoy committing the crime. You don't actually have to have knowledge that you're doing this to commit sex trafficking as an underling to actually be committing a crime to be considered part of the RICO Act. That's what it means. It means that the people that worked under Combs didn't actually have to know that he was doing sex trafficking to be part of the RICO, for it to actually be a crime and to be considered a part of the RICO statute. That's what the prosecution was bringing home to the jury today. However, Combs has to have the knowledge, and they brought that home. He did know. And the reason they're saying that he knew was because of his subsequent acts, the bribery at the Intercontinental Hotel. And we're going to talk about that. At the Intercontinental Hotel, where he beat Cassie and told her, basically get back into this freak off. You've got to do it. When she tried to escape the freak off, that is sex trafficking. He tried to pay off, or he did pay off, the hotel security at the sum of $50,000. That's bribery. Actually, he didn't even have to complete the transaction of bribery for it to be bribery. According to the law, all he has to do is attempt to bribe, and it would have been part of the RICO Act. But he went a step further and he paid him the money. So that's bribery according to the law. So let's get into this. So the prosecution starts strong. They start very strong. They say, over the last few weeks, you've learned that Sean Combs is the leader of a criminal organization. He doesn't take no for an answer. He's into kidnapping. He's into arson, forced labor, bribery of a security officer, and the brutal crimes of sex trafficking. I can't say the word sex on camera for YouTube, so I have to spell it. Consider two moments. March 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel. The defendant got violent with Cassie. You saw what happened. He dragged her back to the freak off. In 2024 at Jane's house, the defendant choked and hit her. She ran. She couldn't get away. These are chapters in the same book. The defendant counted on the silence and the shame. He thought that his fame and wealth and power put him above the law. Over the last 7 weeks, you've heard how he used his staff to promote his power. No one could stop him. We'll talk about RICO, including the sex trafficking and transportation for prostitution, which are also separately charged as standalone crimes. You may have heard of racketeers. When someone commits crimes as a part of a group, they are more dangerous. A group of people whose purpose was to serve and protect the defendant. It's his kingdom. Everyone was there to serve him, fulfilling all of his desires, including his sexual desires. We need to show at least 2 racketeering crimes. They're letting you know we have to show 2 racketeering crimes. They only have to show 2, but they actually have 8. They have 8 that they have to show, but the jury only has to find him guilty of 2 of those 8. And that's what the prosecution is saying. So they spent a great deal of time on the first half with that, and then partly they spent time on Jane. They talk about, and now Jane to me is probably the weakest count that they have as it relates to the sex trafficking, but they talk about the sex trafficking. There are 3 components that you can use for sex trafficking: force, coercion, and fraud. Well, as it relates to Jane, it's fraud. And they brought that home. They talked about how Combs actually tricked her into believing that she was going to be in a relationship. He dangled a relationship in front of her in order for her to participate in the freak offs. What he would do, and it came out in testimony, is that he said, okay, I'm going to take you on a trip to Turks and Caicos. And when she would get there to Turks and Caicos, what would happen? He would have a male prostitute waiting there for the freak off. She did not want to do it. She said so on the stand. She said so in various text messages. She said so in various voicemails that she was not interested in doing those freak offs, that she wanted to be with him, that she did those things because she wanted to please him. That is part of the fraud that the government is trying to prove in the closing, that they are bringing home. They talk about how Combs has the propensity to be violent. They utilize the Intercontinental Hotel incident. The Intercontinental Hotel incident is their version. If it doesn't fit, it must have quit. That is their version. I'm telling you. That's their version of that. They're going to use that Intercontinental Hotel video as their closeout. They've already showed the video a few times in the closing already. That I predict again that they're going to use that as probably one of the last things the jury sees tonight before they leave the courthouse, because that video is the only thing in this whole case that shows in living color the violence, the rage that Sean Combs has, that they can actually see that if you do not do what he says, if you do not do the freak offs, he will drag you by your hair. He will take you in a bathrobe. He has nothing on but a bathrobe or bath towel, around him, but he will drag you by your hair. He will make you come back to the freak off if you don't do what he says. So the prosecution, they are going to use this as their anchor. This is what is going to be used to get him, to get this jury to understand that this is part of the RICO, that this is part of a criminal enterprise, that he utilized KK, his chief of staff, to help him hide that videotape, to bribe Security Officer Flores, who testified on the stand, who said that they ran him down at his house. They called him repeatedly, and when he did not answer, they went to the man's house to get him to agree to the bribe, to the $50,000 bribe that he and his boss eventually agreed to do. Okay, so then they go on. And then they go on and they talk about all of the security and the other staff that was involved in this criminal enterprise. So she talks about KK. KK, she communicated with the defendant's girlfriends, his security. You heard their names: D-Rock, Bonds, Rube, Uncle Paulie, Fahim. They were armed and ready. Remember the incident at the diner with Suge Knight? David James, who was an assistant, told you Combs had guns. In the search, law enforcement found guns, including a rifle with the serial number defaced in LA, 2 AR-15s with their serial numbers cut out. In the defendant's closet, you also have the rotating cast of assistants paid by the defendant's business. Brendan Paul, who was the drug mule from Syracuse University, the basketball player, said he made $100,000 a year, and KK made 6 times that. When your boss asks you to buy drugs, you're committing a crime. When you kidnap someone or locked his girlfriend in a hotel room after your boss stomped on her face, it's a crime. The law does not require us to know that they liked committing crimes. This goes back to what I was saying earlier. You saw KK chiding the defendant to not be so reckless, but she got him cash, drugs. She was a member of the enterprise. It impacted interstate commerce. Minimal is fine. They didn't necessarily have to know or like committing crimes. They didn't necessarily have to know what they were doing was helping to commit, sex, sex, trafficking crimes. But they knew that distribution of drugs were crimes. They knew that utilizing drugs were crimes. They knew that. And so they knew that they were doing this at the behest of their boss. The same thing with the Capricorn Clark kidnapping. When D-Rock and Uncle Paulie, when Uncle Paulie and the other security guys take her into that abandoned building, and they take her in there and they make her take that lie detector test because Sean Combs said someone has stolen some jewelry, and we need to make sure who it is. We need to see who did it. So they take Capricorn Clark into that abandoned building, and they try to, suss out the information. When they do that, and they tell her, if you do not pass this polygraph test, we're throwing you into the East River, that's a crime. Kidnapping her and taking her from her house when she's actually supposed to be going to work at Bad Boy, and you take her to an abandoned building, is kidnapping. That's a crime. That's what the prosecution is saying. And they did that at the behest of Sean Combs. There's no way that Sean Combs did not know that they were doing that. Why? Because he's the one that said, hey, we need to find out who took the jewelry. He orchestrated this whole thing. This is the criminal enterprise. This is the criminal enterprise that they have been laying out. Now, the defense. The defense is in a good spot somewhat because the defense has an advantage today. The defense has the advantage that the prosecution is going first. They get to sort of, utilize everything that the prosecution is saying and sort of knock down everything. They're going to spend a lot of time in their little war room tonight. The Combs has a long night tonight. He'll be up for a while because he and his legal team are going to be in the war room tonight. They're going to be taking every single thing that the prosecution has used in their closing, and they're going to refute every part of that. They're going to break that down. They're going to find reasonable doubt in every single part of their closing. That's the way that they're going to do it. They've already kind of showed us their closing. In the sealed meeting outside of the presence of the jury a couple of days ago, when they argued for the Rule 29, which was the administrative acquittal that they argued for, they argued that there was insufficient evidence, that the prosecution has not presented enough evidence to charge for a RICO, that the prosecution hasn't presented enough evidence to charge for a SEX trafficking or prostitution, that they have not shown clear and cut and clear, concise evidence to charge this man with these counts. And so that is really their closing that they presented on that Rule 29. Now, what today they're going to add to their closing that's pre-existing, and they're going to talk about specific situations that the prosecution has brought up, specifically as it relates to the Jane of it all. I think Jane, as I said, is probably the weakest part of the prosecution's case, just because she is somebody that kind of like wavered, went back and forth, on a lot. She loved him and she wanted to do this, and she, was very much liked, some of the freak offs. But the prosecution talked about that too. They said just because Jane was, or Cassie was, into the freak offs on one hand doesn't mean that they always wanted to do them. And all it takes is one time, the prosecution said, one time. If they did not want to join the freak off just one time, that's enough to charge for SES trafficking. That's enough not to give consent. Also plying them with drugs, also utilizing Jane as a drug mule. Those are the drug trafficking charges. And Jane talked about that on the stand. She talked about and they showed the evidence as it relates to the drug trafficking charges and how she was utilized as a mule along with other folks in the enterprise. And here's the thing. A lot of people are saying, well, I never seen someone, just one person, be utilized for a RICO case. I never seen one person just one person be charged for a RICO case. Well, you have to remember a few things. Number one, everyone that testified against Combs on the side of the prosecution was given immunity. They would have been co-conspirators had they not received immunity. This is very common. So this is very common in mafia cases. I'm sure everybody remembers, or if you don't, you can crack open the internet and look up Google. But a very popular case in the mafia world called the Family Secrets Trial. It kind of like, it's the thing that broke down the mafia, so they say. So the Family Secrets Trial. The Family Secrets Trial was full of mafioso who basically were ratting on the powers that be. And many of them received immunity. They received immunity. That's why they were able to talk. That's why they were able to get on the stand. And some of the co-defendants who wouldn't rat, those are the people that you saw. Now, in the Combs case, one of the reasons that you don't see any co-conspirators is because probably they're unindicted co-conspirators. It is my personal belief that KK is an unindicted co-conspirator. She is somebody that they have not yet indicted, but after the case with Combs resolves itself, I believe she will be indicted based upon all the testimony that has come out in the trial, based upon all the evidence that has come out in the trial against KK and how she was very much involved. I believe that D-Rock is another person that is likely. This is one of Combs's henchmen, one of his enforcers. I believe he's another one that's going to be utilized as a, or is going to be that is now an unindicted co-conspirator, is going to be charged after Combs's case is resolved. They wanted to get the big fish first. This is also the reason you didn't see the defense have any witnesses on the stand. Now, as I told you guys in previous episodes that I've done, the defense does not have to bring one witness. They do not have the burden of proof. The burden of proof is on the prosecution. They are the ones that have to bring the evidence. They are the ones that have to bring the witnesses, and they have to show the proof beyond the reasonable doubt. The only thing that the defense has to do in order to defend their client is to poke holes in the prosecution story. Now, would it have been nice if they could bring a witness or two? Absolutely. Does that tell us something about Combs and his relationships with people, that he didn't have anybody to give character witness statements for him? Yes and no. Number one, yeah, it could mean that he doesn't have anyone to speak on his behalf. But what I really think is going on is that he didn't have anybody to speak on his behalf that would not get up there and incriminate themselves. That's what I really think. I think that he didn't have anyone on his side to speak on his behalf as a witness that would not get up there and incriminate themselves either in this crime or other crimes. And so I think that the defense thought it was safer just to do nothing, because really they don't have to. So they're utilizing the route of these are relationships. I think what you can expect from the defense tomorrow during their closing is these are toxic relationships. Our client isn't perfect. Sean Combs doesn't always do the right thing. He has a fetish. He is a rich guy with eccentric tastes and eccentric fetishes, and he does what he wants to do in terms of the fact that he lives a lavish lifestyle. He was dating women, all kinds of women. Everyone knew about each other. They knew that he wasn't single. They knew that he wasn't, going to be faithful for just one of them. But consider Jane Doe. She was bitter. She was bitter at the fact that he just wouldn't see her. She was jealous of his relationships with other women that he would see out. She would see him out in the press with. She was only interested in money. She wanted to make sure that she could stay in the mansion that he had bought for her. She wanted to make sure that her cash flow kept coming in. The freak offs weren't the problem for Jane Doe. The problem for Jane Doe was that Sean wouldn't just be with her. Now she is testifying in revenge. That's what you can expect from the defense. Something of that nature, because that's what they've got. That's what they've got, because Jane is kind of like, she's a toggler. She's a little bit, unpredictable. She was unpredictable on the stand, really. You just never knew how she was going to act day to day. And she was unpredictable in that relationship. The fact that they're going to utilize the fact that she started the fight, that at the house where she hit him upside the head, and she had to run, or they've already kind of said that, but they're going to utilize the fact that she was the aggressor, that she is the one that aggressed and started the melee with Mr. Combs, that she wasn't getting what she wanted, so she resorted to violence. That's what they're going to do. Now, if the defense can convince the jury that this is somehow not a criminal enterprise, that Mr. Combs is not running a criminal enterprise with his underlings doing his bidding, and that his security are not his enforcers. If they can somehow convince this jury that the RICO statute is overcharging, that this is a result of an overzealous prosecution who has no business charging him with the RICO, and only did so because of who he is, and that they're trying to make an example of him. If they can convince the jury of that, then he may not spend the rest of his life in prison. But I will tell you, they have him dead to right. Well, in my opinion, they have him dead to right on the RICO. I've already said that. It just depends on the jury's understanding of the RICO. If they fully can understand the RICO and what the predicate acts mean. And I think they will after some time, if they don't already. But I think they have him dead to right on the prostitution. Now, the prostitution is a standalone charge. That charge runs from a year to 10 years. So they have, I believe, based upon the statute and what the legal statute is, I believe they have him on that. The standalone charges of the sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie, I believe they have him on that. I do. The Intercontinental Hotel video tells us what we need to know. It gives us what we need to see. It shows him dragging her back into a freak off that she doesn't want to be in. It shows him bribing security hotel security, because he doesn't want anyone to know that this happened. It shows him beating her up so she can't even go to her premiere. So he keeps her from making money or excelling in her career outside of him. So I believe they have him dead to rights on that. I think the sex trafficking on Jane Doe is a little questionable for me. If I was a juror member, I'm not really sure how I would, go on that. I mean, I think the fraud, I get where they're coming from on the fraud. I really do. But I'm not sure Jane Doe, if I would consider her a victim. But they talk about it. The prosecution talks about that. They talk about how, because they brought in an expert, Dr. Hudson, who is an expert on abused women who are who have been caught up in sex trafficking, and she gives the psychology behind that and how abused women who are caught up in sex trafficking sometimes end up actually going back to their abuser, making excuses for their abuser. They don't react in ways in which some people would think, because they are either trauma bonded, they are either going through some sort of situation where they are so traumatized by the actual act of the abuser that they're afraid of him. So they're so afraid of him, they don't move at all, and they just do what he says. And so that's part of the Jane Doe theory. It's also part of the Cassie theory. And I would also expect the defense to sort of try to tear that apart tomorrow as well. But the prosecution has done a fairly good job of sort of covering themselves off on that. But back to the charges, I do think that they have him on the sex charges as it relates to Cassie. And remember that the minimum for the sex charges are a minimum of 15 years, and it can go up to life, I believe. And then as it relates to the RICO is a minimum of 30 years, and it can go up to life. Now, I think these juror members they have some pretty intelligent people on the jury. I mean, I think they're all intelligent, really, because intelligent thinking human beings are on these juries. They're like you and me. They're people who are, I'm not a lawyer, but I've worked in law office. I've worked for the district attorney. And so I know exactly how these cases go. But these juror members have not worked in the legal field, so they don't know. But I think that they're going to have a great understanding about what the RICO statute is, and they're going to look at it backwards and forwards. I think that we can look for them to deliberate. So they're going to start deliberating on Monday. I think that we can look for them to deliberate probably a week. I don't think that they're going to be, they're going to have a verdict anything shorter than a week, but you never know. They could all go into the jury room on Monday, take an initial vote, and they might all agree, and they could come back with a verdict in 30 minutes. You have no idea. You know what I mean? But it's all going to come down to the closing. And for those of you who came to the live later, at the beginning of the live, I talked about Johnny Cochran, and I talked about how if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And one of the reasons the O.J. Simpson trial went the way that it did was because of that line. It's the closing arguments, and I cannot say this more than enough, that win trials. They are the things that convince people. They are the closers. The closers convince juries of what they should believe. And if you have a strong enough prosecution or a strong enough defense, the jury can be swayed. And some people are coming in with their minds made up already. So depending on which side has the more stronger closer and where the jury is in terms of how they feel about things, that's how it's going to be. So I expect that the closing for tomorrow to be very interesting. They're still going. Let's see where we are now, because the prosecution is still going. They've had quite a few. So let me give you the latest. Where Slavic is, they're adjourned right now. They're adjourned. They're done now. They're done. Her last little bit. I'll give you the last transcript, the last little bit. She said, finally, venue. We only have to show an act in this district. Doesn't have to be criminal. The Southern District of New York includes Manhattan and the Bronx. Count 2, freak-offs in Manhattan. Count 3, freak-offs, jewels to the London Hotel in Manhattan. Count 4, Jane in Manhattan. You spent 7 weeks listening to a lot of the evidence that was hard to hear or see. You heard from Kid Cudi, whose house was broken into and whose car was burned. You heard from Regina Ventura, Cassie Ventura's mother, Deontay Nash, how he ran the enterprise with total control. So that was her final words. And I have some commentary here. For those wondering, here's how Combs' family looks in the courtroom. So the twins and the other sister there together, sitting next to Mama Combs, and the brothers on the end. And then they're all on one row. And they've attended this hearing pretty faithfully, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. I know that Sean Combs have been reported as being in somewhat of good spirits. He told the judge the other day that he was doing a good job or whatnot. But I think that there is not a world where Sean Combs goes home. I think that Sean Combs goes to prison. I think that it's just a matter of whether he's going to prison for a minimum of 15 years because of the SEX charges, the XCX trafficking charges, and the prostitution charges, or he's going to prison for 30 years at minimum because of the RICO. And that's really what it looks like. I don't think that Sean Combs is going to be going home anytime soon. That after the trial is over with and the verdict has been rendered, then we get into his side will file an appeal immediately. I expect for them to file an appeal on the jury situation, the dismissal of the juror number 6. I expect for them to use that as a post-conviction appeal issue to grant him a new trial if he is convicted. I also expect that if he is convicted, that the government will immediately get into the forfeiture portions of the court process, which is forfeiting his fortune, which means that his homes, his cars, they'll start seizing all of his finances and all of that. That will be next, and that'll probably take a lot of years to sort of get through. There's a lot of red tape, but they're going to start that process as soon as that verdict comes through. That's going to be the next thing on the government's list. And then of course the next thing on the government's list is getting these co-conspirators indicted and funneled through the judiciary process. And then after that, it's really going to be a situation where Combs is going to be fighting appeals. If he is convicted, he's going to be fighting appeals, and just trying to get new trials or trying to get his time shortened. That's kind of what that looks like. It's going to be tough for people to watch because I think, you guys have seen my other episodes where I talk about R. Kelly, who had the same charges. He's in prison for 50 years because in addition to the racketeering charges, he also received 21 years because of child pornography. So he in a different district. So he has about 51 years. And so he is in a situation where he's currently trying to get out of jail, saying he's sick and all these things. And I think that's what we can expect from Combs if he does get that RICO charge. It's going to be hard for him to adjust. He's currently in a federal holding jail, is what I would call it, detention center in Brooklyn, which is nothing compared to the federal prison that if he's convicted, where he will be transferred to. It's not very nice, and nobody wants to, be there. It's not a fun place to be. And so, that's where everything lies. It's going to be interesting to see how this whole thing pans out. I'm going to, stick with you guys and let you know how everything goes. I'll come back later with an episode, not about the Combs trial, but about an update on the, what is this guy's name? Brian Kohlberger, the kid, or he's not a kid, but the guy that killed those, people in Idaho, and the college kids in Idaho. So I'm going to come back with an update about that and talk to you about where the court process lies there. Also, I did a episode on the indictment of Carmelo Anthony, who has been indicted on the murder of Austin Metcalf. And someone commented that I did not say Austin's last name correctly. And so I want to make sure that I am saying it correctly. His name is Austin Metcalf, and I am not trying to be disrespectful to him at all. But this person said that English is important. While I speak English very well, I write English very well as well. But sometimes we mispronounce names. It's a very common thing to do. And my apologies if anyone was offended by that. But thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is CasNCourt TV. This is your girl, Miss Public Info, otherwise known as Cass Spencer. And I'm glad that you joined me today, and I'll see you later. All right. Stay safe.